Hi there, welcome to the Please Sleep channel. You probably clicked on this video thinking ancient Egypt was all about pyramids, golden pharaohs, and mystical gods with bird heads. And yeah, there were some of those. But what they don't tell you in those National Geographic specials is just how insanely difficult it was to simply stay alive. Like for even one day, if you were a farmer, you'd bake in 100-degree heat, fight off locusts, and try not to drown in the Nile's yearly tantrums. A priest, sure, you got respect, but also had to shave every inch of your body every day. A builder, hope you love carrying limestone for 12 hours straight. And if you were a woman, well, best of luck with childbirth, disease, and trying not to get buried alive in your husband's tomb. This isn't a video about Cleopatra or ancient alien theories. This is about how everyone from slaves to pharaohs had a really rough time. So lay back, try to relax, and let's take a long, brutally honest stroll through the burning sands of Egypt where surviving even one day was an achievement. Imagine this. You wake up, but it's not your bed, not your house, and definitely not your air conditioning humming softly in the background. No, you're lying on a thin mat made of palm fibers, your back already sore, and the air is so dry it feels like your tongue's been left in the sun overnight. Outside there's no breeze, just heat, endless, relentless, burning heat. It's barely sunrise, but the sun is already Welcome to ancient Egypt population. Somewhere between a lot of sweating peasants and several thousand crocodiles. You probably think ancient Egypt was a grand place to live. Maybe you've seen the pyramids, the temples, the lavish tombs of kings surrounded by gold and incense and cats that get more respect than your average office worker. But here's the truth, unless you were born into the 0.01% of elite families, you're probably just another sunborn body struggling to survive one more day without collapsing. Let's say you're a farmer, which statistically speaking, you are. Around 90% of the population were rural laborers. That means you don't get to live in the stone cities with columns and cool statues. No, you live in a mud brick hut somewhere near the Nile. Not the most durable building material, especially when the annual flood season comes and tries to erase your home like an etch. But we'll get to that later. First, water. You need some, and fast. The sun here doesn't just shin, it crushes. Temperatures often hit 100 degrees Fahrenheit or more, and there's zero humidity. Your only reliable source of water is the Nile. But that means you have to walk there barefoot, over cracked ground and sharp pebbles because you don't own shoes. Once you get to the river, you scoop up the water in a clay pot, hoping it's not full of mosquito larvae, dead fish, or crocodile pee. It probably is, but hey, you don't have much choice. Water's water. You carry the heavy pot back to your home, balancing it carefully on your shoulder. While the sun tries to cook your brain through your skull, you're already sweating, which would be fine, except it's your body's only attempt to keep you cool, and you're losing moisture faster than you can drink it. Back at the hut, your family is awake. Your wife is tending to the fire pit, preparing some bread made from emmer wheat mixed with sand and grit accidentally, of course. There's no modern milling, so your teeth will get worn down to the gums by age 30 just from chewing. And your kids, they're naked, covered in dust, and already picking at their lice. Childhood diseases run rampant here. There's no soap, no medicine, no understanding of germs. You've probably lost 1 or 2 children already to fevers, infected cuts, or something as simple as diarrhea. The government doesn't care. Your job is to feed the empire. That's it. You work your plot of land, which technically belongs to the pharaoh or the local temple. You plant barley, onions, flax. You hope the Nile floods just the right amount. Not too much, it'll drown everything. Not too little, your crops will die and you'll be left with nothing but sand and despair. And the taxes? Oh, you'd better believe those are still due. The pharaoh scribes will come around during harvest season and take a large chunk of your grain. If your harvest was poor, too bad, they'll take it anyway. Can't pay? No problem, you'll pay in labor. Stone hauling, temple building, ditch digging. They'll find something for you to do. But don't worry, you'll get paid. In Biadasra, your daily wage is a few jugs of beer and some bread. Hope you like carbs, because that's your entire food pyramid. And don't get any ideas about complaining. Dissent isn't tolerated. The government runs on a strict hierarchy of officials, priests, and if you resist or miss your quotas, you might get whipped. Or worse, drafted into a military campaign far from home, where you'll probably die of heat stroke before ever seeing the enemy. Want to cool off? Too bad. There's no shade, except what little you can find under a date palm or inside your tiny house. But even that's hot. It's like sitting inside a clay oven, which, to be fair, it kind of is. Your clothes, a simple linen kilt. That's it. No hat, no sun. You might smear a bit of animal fat on your skin to keep from burning, but mostly you just turn red, then brown, then peel. Every day the air, constantly filled with dust. Every breath feels like you're inhaling crushed pottery. There are sandstorms that sting your face and get in your eyes, and there's no relief, no window to close, no filtered air, no "Hey Alexa, turn on the fan," and the bugs. Oh, the bugs. Flies swarm your face all day. Mosquitoes at night. You sleep under a net. Maybe, if you're lucky, but probably not. You slap yourself every 5 minutes trying to avoid another bite. But let's say you make it through the day. You've worked the fields, paid your taxes, eaten your sandy bread, swatted 300 flies, and managed not to pass out from dehydration. You crawl back into your mud brick oven of a house and lay down on your itchy mat. You close your eyes, and that's when you hear a droom's ritual music from the local temple. It's a festival day, apparently. Again, and that means you'll hear chanting, horns, and wailing until past midnight. Sleep, not tonight. Not unless you can sleep through the sound of people sacrificing a bull to houses down. Oh, and did we mention disease? Because it's everywhere. There's no sewage system. Waste is dumped in the streets, or in shallow pits that overflow. Flies bring bacteria. People cough without covering their mouths. And medicine is more about spells and amulets than science. Got a headache? Here wear this frog-shaped charm and drink a tea made of lizard tails. Still sick? Must be a curse. Let's call a priest. That'll help. Maybe, probably not. The point is, nothing is clean. Not your water, not your food, not your clothes, not your body. You're a human-shaped dust rag walking through a heat wave with no protection. And still, you have to do it all again tomorrow. And the next day, and the next, until one day you drop from exhaustion in the fields, and they bury you in a shallow grave with a clay pot of stale beer and some onions. And then they move on, because that's just how life goes here, harsh, hot, unforgiving. So if you think you could handle a day in ancient Egypt just one single day, remember this. You wouldn't last until lunch. So you think maybe you could have made it as a peasant in ancient Egypt? You've seen the documentaries, heard the gentle harp music, maybe read about the fertility of the Nile's floodplains, and thought, hey, that doesn't sound so bad. Work the fields, catch some fish, worship the sun, wear linen. Easy, right? No, absolutely not. Because being a farmer in ancient Egypt wasn't some peaceful sun-drenched lifestyle. It was back-breaking, soul-crushing labor wrapped in poverty, disease, and constant fear of either famine or taxation or both. Let's paint the picture. You're a man in your late 20s, which basically makes you your skin is sun-scorched and cracked, your hands are permanently calloused, and your back aches from years of bending over in the fields. You live in a tiny mud brick house with one room, no ventilation, no doors, and maybe a small enclosure for a goat, if you're lucky. You're married to a wife, probably had a first child at 14, and now, 10 years later, you have 8 kids. 2 of them are sick, 1 has lice, 1 already died of a fever last year, and 1 is currently playing with a scorpion. Childhood mortality rates were sky high, so you've learned to not get too attached before they turn 10. Every morning, long before the sun rises, you're up. No alarm clock needed, just the sound of donkeys braying, chickens clucking, and your neighbor arguing with his wife about whose turn it is to haul water. You eat a quick breakfast of bread, and maybe a few dates if it's a good week. No coffee, no eggs, no fruit smoothie, just dry, sandy bread that grinds down your molars like sandpaper. You wash it down with beer, not the good kind, not even the medieval kind. It's more like a chunky barley soup that just happens to be fermented. Then it's off to the fields. The land you work doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the pharaoh or to a temple, and you're just a laborer assigned to work it. You grow barley, emmer wheat, onions, garlic, maybe flax for linen. There are no tractors, no plows with wheels, no fertilizer unless you count animal dung, which you apply by hand. You use a simple wooden hoe, and you dig row after row under a sun that seems actively trying to murder you. The Nile has receded after its flood, leaving behind fertile silt. The bad part is, now you have to work that soil before it dries out and turns into cracked stone. You plant, weed, water by hand, and hope nothing goes wrong. And things will go wrong. Locusts, mice, bad floods, droughts, you name it. You're completely at the mercy of nature. But that's not your only problem, because even if your crops survive, the tax collector will come. He always comes, wearing a fine linen robe, carrying a papyrus scroll and a reed pen, and always flanked by a few guards with sticks. He doesn't care if your wife is sick or if your child just died. He wants your grain. If you're lucky, he takes only what the state demands. If you're not, he takes more and pockets the difference. There's no appealing to the authorities. Corruption is built into the system. If you refuse or argue, you're beaten. If you try to hide your harvest, you're dragged before a judge who probably knows the tax collector and find more than you ever had. So what do? You give him the grain, you bow, you say thank you, and you pray to the gods that next year will be better. Speaking of gods, you will have a lot of them. You worship Ra, Osiris, Isis, Anubis, Hathor, Sobek, and about 50 others, each responsible for one thing or another. Every month is a festival or a holy day, which sounds nice until you realize that means more work. You have to clean, prepare offerings, slaughter animals, attend processions, and pretend to be joyful while your stomach growls and your kids are coughing up huna. Sometimes the priests come and demand a donation for the temple. You give them what little you can, some onions, maybe a bit of beer. Not because you want to, but because it's dangerous not to. The gods must be appeased, and the priests speak for the gods. and the gods you're told are always watching. You can't read or write. Literacy is a luxury reserved for the scribes and priests. You don't know what's written on the walls of the temples or inside the pharaoh's tomb. You've heard they say the afterlife is full of fields of reeds and eternal peace. But right now you're even more concerned about the rats in your granary and the giant centipede that bit your foot last week. You haven't seen a doctor, because there are no doctors, not the kind you think of. Anyway, there are healers, sure, but their remedies mostly involve crocodile dung, honey, and spells. If you're lucky, maybe some crushed acacia bark or moldy bread will help. If not, well ... The gods will decide. Your clothing is simply a linen kilt for you, maybe a wraparound dress for your wife. You own no shoes, no jewelry, no mirror. Your hair is cut short or shaved, mostly because of lice. You smell like sweat, dust, and goats. Everyone does. You bathe when you can, usually in the Nile, though that's also where people dump waste and wash livestock. Bathing might make you feel a little better, until you get back to the fields and start sweating again within minutes. Nights aren't much better. Your house is hot, filled with smoke from the cooking fire, and alive with insects. There's no privacy. Your whole family sleeps in one room. You lie on your mat sore and itchy, listening to the buzzing of mosquitoes and the occasional scream of a hyena in the distance. You fall asleep wondering if you will ever wake up tomorrow with enough strength to do it all over again. Because there's no retirement, no pension. You work until you drop and then your sons take over. If they survive, if they don't, the land is reassigned to someone else, and your name disappears like a grain of sand in a desert wind. There are no statues built for you, no songs written in your honor. Your life is service, to the land, to the pharaoh, to the gods. That's all. And yet, somehow, this system endured for thousands of years. Millions lived and died under the burning sun, leaving behind only bones and broken pottery. And pyramids, of course. But you didn't build those. Those were the state project's monuments, not to the people, but to the rulers who never once bent over a furrowed field. So the next time someone tells you they wish they could travel back to ancient Egypt, ask them this: would you rather be the man on the throne, or the man breaking his back to feed him? Because odds are, you'd be the latter. And trust me, you wouldn't last a week. Maybe not even a day. So you think maybe you could have made it as a peasant in ancient Egypt? You've seen the documentaries, heard the gentle harp music, maybe read about the fertility of the Nile's floodplains, and thought, hey, that doesn't sound so bad. Work the fields, catch some fish, worship the sun, wear linen. Easy, right? No, absolutely not. Because being a farmer in ancient Egypt wasn't some peaceful sun-drenched lifestyle. It was back-breaking, soul-crushing labor wrapped in poverty, disease, and constant fear of either famine or taxation or both. Let's paint the picture. You're a man in your late 20s, which basically makes you your skin is sun-scorched and cracked, your hands are permanently calloused, and your back aches from years of bending over in the fields. You live in a tiny mud brick house with one room, no ventilation, no doors, and maybe a small enclosure for a goat, if you're lucky. You're married to a wife, probably had her first child at 14, and now, 10 years later, you have 8 kids. 2 of them are sick, 1 has lice, 1 already died of a fever last year, and 1 is currently playing with a scorpion. Childhood mortality rates were sky high, so you've learned to not get too attached before they turn 10. Every morning, long before the sun rises, you're up. No alarm clock needed, just the sound of donkeys braying, chickens clucking, and your neighbor arguing with his wife about whose turn it is to haul water. You eat a quick breakfast of bread, and maybe a few dates if it's a good week. No coffee, no eggs, no fruit smoothie. Just dry, sandy bread that grinds down your molars like sandpaper. You wash it down with beer, not the good kind, not even the medieval kind. It's more like a chunky barley soup that just happens to be fermented. Then it's off to the fields. The land you work doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the pharaoh or to a temple, and you're just a laborer assigned to work it. You grow barley, emmer wheat, onions, garlic, maybe flax for linen. There are no tractors, no plows with wheels, no fertilizer unless you count animal dung, which you apply by hand. You use a simple wooden hoe, and you dig row after row under a sun that seems actively trying to murder you. The Nile has receded after its flood, leaving behind fertile silt. The bad part is, now you have to work that soil before it dries out and turns into cracked stone. You plant, weed, water by hand, and hope nothing goes wrong. And things will go wrong. Locusts, mice, bad floods, droughts, you name it. You're completely at the mercy of nature. But that's not your only problem, because even if your crops survive, the tax collector will come. He always comes, wearing a fine linen robe, carrying a papyrus scroll and a reed pen, and always flanked by a few guards with sticks. He doesn't care if your wife is sick or if your child just died. He wants your grain. If you're lucky, he takes only what the state demands. If you're not, he takes more and pockets the difference. There's no appealing to the authorities. Corruption is built into the system. If you refuse or argue, you're beaten. If you try to hide your harvest, you're dragged before a judge who probably knows the tax collector and find more than you ever had. So what do? You give him the grain, You bow, you say thank you, and you pray to the gods that next year will be better. Speaking of gods, you will have a lot of them. You worship Ra, Osiris, Isis, Anubis, Hathor, Sobek, and about 50 others, each responsible for one thing or another. Every month is a festival or a holy day, which sounds nice until you realize that means more work. You have to clean, prepare offerings, slaughter animals, attend processions, and pretend to be joyful while your stomach growls and your kids are coughing up Huna. Sometimes the priests come and demand a donation for the temple. You give them what little you can, some minions, maybe a bit of beer. Not because you want to, but because it's dangerous not to. The gods must be appeased, and the priests speak for the gods. And the gods, you're told, are always watching. You can't read or write. Literacy is a luxury reserved for the scribes and priests. You don't know what's written on the walls of the temples or inside the pharaoh's tomb. You've heard they say the afterlife is full of fields of reeds and eternal peace. But right now you're even more concerned about the rats in your granary and the giant centipede that bit your foot last week. You haven't seen a doctor, because there are no doctors, not the kind you think of. Anyway, there are healers, sure, but their remedies mostly involve crocodile dung, honey, and spells. If you're lucky, maybe some crushed acacia bark or moldy bread will help. If not, well ... The gods will decide. Your clothing is simply a linen kilt for you, maybe a wraparound dress for your wife. You own no shoes, no jewelry, no mirror. Your hair is cut short or shaved, mostly because of lice. You smell like sweat, dust, and goats. Everyone does. You bathe when you can, usually in the Nile, though that's also where people dump waste and wash livestock. Bathing might make you feel a little better, until you get back to the fields and start sweating again within minutes. Nights aren't much better. Your house is hot, filled with smoke from the cooking fire, and alive with insects. There's no privacy. Your whole family sleeps in one room. You lie on your mat sore and itchy, listening to the buzzing of mosquitoes and the occasional scream of a hyena in the distance. You fall asleep wondering if you will ever wake up tomorrow with enough strength to do it all over again. Because there's no retirement, no pension. You work until you drop and then your sons take over. If they survive, if they don't, the land is reassigned to someone else, and your name disappears like a grain of sand in a desert wind. There are no statues built for you, no songs written in your honor. Your life is service, to the land, to the pharaoh, to the gods. That's all. And yet, somehow, this system endured for thousands of years. Millions lived and died under the burning sun, leaving behind only bones and broken pottery. And pyramids, of course. But you didn't build those. Those were the state project's monuments, not to the people, but to the rulers who never once bent over a furrowed field. So the next time someone tells you they wish they could travel back to ancient Egypt, ask them this: would you rather be the man on the throne, or the man breaking his back to feed him? Because odds are, you'd be the latter. And trust me, you wouldn't last a week. Maybe not even a day. So far, we've talked about what it's like being a farmer, waking up dehydrated in a mud brick hut, and praying the Nile doesn't flood you into oblivion. But let's say just for fun you managed to dodge the fields. Maybe your dad was a minor official. Maybe your family knew someone at the temple. Whatever the reason, you got lucky. You're not working the land, you're going to school. That's right. You're on track to become one of ancient Egypt's most respected professions. A scribe. Sounds good, right? You imagine yourself sitting in a shady room with a nice breeze, writing fancy letters with a brush and sipping date juice. You picture yourself drafting royal decrees, drawing sacred scrolls, maybe even writing your own little poem to the gods on the side. But here's the part they don't tell you: being a scribe is like signing up for ancient boot camp. Except instead of running laps, you're memorizing hundreds upon hundreds of complicated symbols with names like duckfoot. First off, school isn't fun. You start young, around age 5 or 6. You don't get recess toys or nap time. What you get is a wooden board, a stylus, and a teacher who firmly believes that the best way to make a child learn is through frequent yelling and physical punishment. You learn by copying all day. You copy names, prayers, math problems, legal formulas. If your lines are crooked or your strokes are sloppy, the teacher hits your hands. And let's be honest, your lines are sloppy because hieroglyphs aren't like letters. They're not a BC. They're a complex system of logograms and phonetic symbols, and there are over 700 of them, sometimes over 1,000 depending on the period. Some are simple like a bird. Some are very much not simple, like a seated man with a loaf and a zigzag line above his head. That means something oddly specific, like to give generously to the temple storehouse under divine supervision. You're expected to memorize all of it, not just how they look, but what they mean, how they're used, when they're silent, when they're symbolic, and when they double as wordplay. And God forbid you accidentally draw a sacred symbol upside down. Some of these signs represent living deities, and messing them up is considered blasphemy. One wrong bird, and suddenly your school day becomes a public shaming ritual. But you keep going, because your parents are counting on you. A son who becomes a scribe is a blessing. He won't die in the fields, or serve as cannon fodder in the pharaoh's army. He'll work for the temples, or the court, or the granary, maybe even live in the city. So you study hard, you don't get weekends, you don't get holidays. The only break you get is when the Nile floods so much that the roads are washed out and no one can travel. But even then, you're expected to practice at home. If you can find papyrus, which is expensive, you use that. If not, you write on potsherds or stone flakes. Your ink is made of soot and gum. Your brush is a reed you chew on until it's soft. You spend hours hunched over, trying not to smudge your work. Your hands are permanently stained black, your neck always sore, and your vision probably already going bad by the time you're 15. And once you graduate, your life doesn't get easier. Sure, you're not out in the sun breaking rocks, but your job is still you work in a hot, dimly lit room surrounded by scrolls and dusty ledgers. Your job is to record everything: grain shipments, livestock tallies, labor rosters, legal contracts, temple offerings, royal proclamations, tax records, and sometimes the death certificates of people you went to school with. Everything has to be precise. One misplaced line, one omitted god name, and you could be accused of falsifying a document, a serious crime that could get you whipped, imprisoned, or worse. And the bureaucracy you worked for, oh, it's massive. Ancient Egypt had one of the most complex and meticulous administrative systems in the ancient world. There are layers upon layers of hierarchy. You don't just write for the pharaoh, you write for your immediate boss, who answers to another boss, who's probably under a high priest or vizier, and all of them expect you to make them look good. Sometimes, you're asked to fudge the numbers. Maybe the temple's grain store wasn't as full as it should be. Maybe someone skimmed a little off the top. You're told to make the records match the expectations, not the reality. You know it's wrong, but saying no could ruin you. So you're right, you pretend, and you hope no one audits your scroll in 3 years and uses it as evidence against you. If you work in the temples, your day is filled with ritual writing. You copy spells, prayers, hymns, funerary texts. The work is sacred, but it's also exhausting. You can't just slap ink on papyrus, you have to purify yourself. That means shaving your body, bathing multiple times a day, wearing special linen, and eating ritually clean food, all while maintaining a steady hand and making sure no fly lands on the page. If you're lucky, you rise through the ranks. You become a chief scribe, overseeing others, sitting in a slightly bigger room, and having someone else bring you scrolls. But even then, you're still just part of the machine. Your life is dedicated to recording the lives of others. You write the names of kings, but no one will ever carve your name into stone. You'll die with ink-stained fingers, a bad spine, and maybe a tiny statue in your tomb holding a papyrus roll, reward for decades of service. And let's talk about what happens if you decide this life isn't for you. Maybe you wake up one day and think, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to work with wood, or bake bread, or just live in peace. Too bad, you're already marked. You've been trained. Your whole social role is tied to literacy. And abandoning it would be like walking out of medical school today to become a juggler. You'd probably be reassigned to some miserable administrative outpost in the middle of nowhere, auditing barley shipments for the rest of your life. And don't even think about becoming a writer in the modern sense. Scribes don't get creative. You copy, you replicate. You don't invent. The few who do, those who write new hymns, new myths, or political satire are rare, and almost always protected by powerful patrons. You're not one of them. You write what you're told, and that's it. So yes, scribes were respected. They were educated, well-fed, often better dressed than the common man. But they paid for it with their childhood, their eyesight, their hands, and their freedom. Being a scribe was not a luxurious life, it was a life of service, repetition, and constant anxiety. And if you made one mistake, one badly drawn falcon or a forgotten sun disk, it could all come crashing down. So next time you see some beautiful hieroglyphs etched into a temple wall, don't just admire the art. Think of the boy who sat for years in a hot schoolhouse, who bled ink and sweat to carve that line perfectly. And think of how, after all that, he was probably forgotten anyway. Welcome to the writing class of ancient Egypt. Hope you brought your own reed brush. Let's say things didn't work out for you in scribe school. Maybe you couldn't memorize the 700 hieroglyphs. Maybe you smudged one too many sacred scrolls. Or maybe you were just born into the wrong family, entirely no connections, no bribes, no chance at literacy. Congratulations. You've been recruited for a different kind of national service, building a pyramid. You've seen the photos, right? Those perfectly cut stones stacked in impossible precision, reaching toward the blazing sky. You've probably thought, wow, what a marvel of ancient engineering. But here, what you didn't tease, hundreds of exhausted men hauling multi-ton blocks with nothing but rope, sweat, and splinters, day after day. In the sun, in the dust, on food that wouldn't keep a chicken alive for long. Let's begin with your first day on the job. You don't apply for this work. No, you're conscripted. It's part of your tax. Can't pay in grain, pay in labor. A scribe shows up to your village with a list, and guess what? Your name's on it. You're told to pack up and report to the nearest construction site. You say goodbye to your family. You may be gone for months, maybe years. You travel with a group of other men, all just as unlucky, and arrive at the pyramid site. and it's not what you imagined. There's no order, no elegant symmetry, just chaos. Scaffolding made of logs and ropes, piles of limestone, swarms of flies, men shouting over the crash of stone. The air is hot and thick with dust. You can barely see 5 feet ahead without coughing. Your first task, move stones. They weigh anywhere from 1 to 5 tons. You're handed a rope, some wooden sleds, and a team of 20 other guys. Together, you pull and pull. Your hands bleed. Your back screams. You sweat so much you stop feeling wet, you just feel dizzy. And this is just before lunch. Speaking of lunch, it's simple. Bread, onions, beer. Everyday bread, onions, beer. No meat unless there's a festival. No fruit unless someone drops one. The bread is hard. The beer is warm. The onions are, well, onions you eat sitting on a rock, staring at the giant unfinished tomb you're helping to build. You don't even know the pharaoh's name. You just know he wants to live forever, and your job is to make that happen. After lunch, more hauling. If you're not pulling, you're chiseling with a copper tool that dulls constantly. So you have to stop, walk to the sharpening area, wait in line, get it sharpened, and come back. Then you're behind on your quota, so you work faster, less careful. More mistakes, your supervisor notices, he yells. He threatens if you damage a stone too much, you'll be punished. And that doesn't mean a stern warning, it means public whipping. You've seen it happen. A man tripped over a rope and cracked a slab last week. He was dragged to the center of the site, tied to a post, and beaten with a cane. Not because the stone was irreplaceable, but because punishment keeps everyone else motivated. The foremen are tough. They answer to officials who answer to priests who answer to the royal architect who answers to the pharaoh. There's no room for excuses. You don't work hard because you're passionate, you work hard because someone is always watching, and someone always needs more limestone. The noise is constant. Hammers, chisels, shouting. The smell is worse. Sweat, smoke, rotting, food, urine. There's no real toilet, just trenches. Disease spreads fast. You've seen men collapse mid-task. Some don't get back up. A few are left where they fall until nightfall. The pyramid doesn't stop for the dead. You sleep in a workers' village nearby. It's cramped, full of fleas and coughing men. You sleep on a mat or the ground. You dream of being home, of bathing in the Nile, of not waking up sore in every possible part of your body. Morning comes too fast. A horn blows. You get up, eat a stale hunk of bread, and shuffle back to the site. Day after day, week after week. You work under the sun, in the heat, with no shade. Your linen kilt is stiff with sweat and dust. Your skin blisters. You're trying to protect your hands with cloth wraps. They don't help much. Your spine starts to ache constantly. Your knees feel like they've been hit with stones, which, ironically, they have. And if you get injured, you're patched up with honey and prayers. Maybe a bit of crushed herbs. If you can't walk, you're no longer useful. If you complain, you're a problem. There's always someone ready to replace you. You start to hate the stone. The very sight of limestone makes your stomach turn. You know its weight, its sharp edges, its smell when it's wet. You start seeing it in your sleep. You hear the grinding of the sled in your ears, even when it's quiet. You work for months. You miss your family. You miss your village. You miss the simplicity of farming, something you never thought you'd say. You know, the pharaoh won't thank you. He doesn't know you exist. When the pyramid is finally done, it will bear his name, his glory, his legacy. Your name will not be carved into its walls. You'll return home if you're lucky with a few scars, a bad back, and some leftover rations. Maybe a linen sash if your foreman liked you. And the cycle starts again. Next year, the next project. Maybe a temple. Maybe another pyramid. Maybe a canal. The state always needs workers forever because death never stops. Pharaohs die, temples fall, tombs collapse, and each time, someone like you is summoned to build, repair, lift, drag, sweat, suffer. It's not slavery, they'll tell you. You're a free man, you're being paid. Sure, if you count stale beer and bread as payment. If you count surviving another day without injury as a reward. But really, you're not free. You're trapped in a system built on sand, sweat, and unquestioned obedience. And yet, the pyramids still stand. Thousands of years later. People marvel at them, take selfies, write articles, make documentaries. They call it a miracle. But you know the truth. It wasn't a miracle. It was just work. Relentless, brutal, dehumanizing work. Done by people whose names no one remembers. People who gave their bodies to history. People like you.
Ancient Egyptian temples are majestic. That's the word most people use. Majestic. Monolithic. Holy. You've seen the documentary Stone Pillars Rising Toward the Sky. Massive statues of gods with hawk heads or crocodile snouts, incense burning in golden altars. Sunlight slicing through towering doorways as if Ra himself designed the lighting. But you're not. The one visiting this temple to admire the architecture. You work there, and your job, unfortunately, has nothing to do with prayer or spiritual enlightenment. You are not a priest. You are not a scribe. You are not even one of the musicians who bang a drum during the sunrise chants. No, your job is to sweep the floor. Not just any floor, the temple floor. The massive stone floor that stretches across courtyards, inner sanctums, shadowy halls and underground storehouses. And that floor is absolutely covered in bat dung, bird droppings, dust, sand, dead bugs, spilled beer, flower petals and ash every single morning. You arrive before dawn, along with a dozen other underpaid temple servants. Your tools are basic: a straw broom, a dented copper pan, a dirty cloth, and a bad attitude. The head priest expects everything to sparkle, not because he cares about sanitation, but because the gods, he says, deserve a clean house. Never mind that the temple has no roof in some sections, allowing bats to roost overhead and pigeons to flap in circles like it's a spiritual aviary. The moment anything lands on the floor, it's your fault. It's your job to make it disappear. You start in the outer courtyard. The ground is gritty with wind-blown sand. You sweep it into small piles. Then the wind immediately blows it back in your face. Great! There's a guard watching you from a shaded corner. And you know if you pause for it too long, he'll report you to the overseer. You don't want that. The overseer is the kind of man who yells for fun. So you keep sweeping. Eventually, you move to the entrance hall. Its beautiful columns painted with scenes of gods and pharaohs in impossible colors. But the floor, it smells like old fruit, because people bring offerings, baskets of dates, figs, cucumbers, onions, and sometimes full dead birds wrapped in linen. Not all of these offerings make it to the altar. Some fall over, some rot in corners, and no one notices until the flies show up. So guess who gets to clean it? You. But don't touch the altar. That's sacred. You're not even supposed to look at it directly. If a priest catches you glancing at the inner sanctuary where the god's statue stands, you could be accused of disrespect. Even though you were the one who just cleaned 3 dozen bird droppings off the temple threshold with your bare hands. Respect is a one-way street here. The priests, they live well. They wear fresh linen, shave their entire bodies daily, and eat offerings from the gods' tables. They walk with sandals and perfumes. You smell like sweat, dust, and cat urine. Why cat urine? Because there are temple cats. Lots of them. Cats are sacred. That means no one gets to remove them, scold them, or even look mildly annoyed when they sit in the middle of a sacred walkway licking their butts. But when they knock over an oil lamp, or tip over a basket of lotus petals, or pee in a corner of the storage chamber, that's your problem. You clean it, without complaining. Once you're done with the main halls, you're sent to the storerooms. These are darker, cooler chambers filled with jars of grain, wine, wool, and scrolls. There are bugs everywhere, scarabs and fleas. Sometimes you think you hear rats screaming behind the walls. You're not allowed to use fire or oil lamps without permission. So you work in near darkness, trying not to knock over a sacred scroll or drop a jug of sesame oil worth more than your monthly rations. There's a scribe in the corner who scowls at you. He doesn't say a word, but every time you bump into a shelf, he clicks his tongue like you just committed a crime. You hate that guy, and yet you still bow to him. Because he can write your name on a complaint scroll, and suddenly you're reassigned to the animal pens. Speaking of which, let's talk about the sacred animals. Yes, they're holy. Yes, they're symbols of the gods. No, they don't clean up after themselves. You've had to sweep the walkway outside the baboon enclosure. Ever smelled baboon droppings after a hot afternoon? It's the kind of stench that makes you believe in curses. But you smile through it. Because complaining gets you nowhere. You once saw a fellow servant roll his eyes during a priest's chant. Just one eye roll. He was reassigned to latrine duty for a month. You haven't seen him smile since. Lunch is simple. Stale bread, a slice of fish if you're lucky, and temple beer. You eat alone or with the other servants, seated on a stone step in the back of the temple. The priests eat indoors. They get honey cakes and fresh fruit. You try not to look at them while you chew your hard, dry meal. After lunch, you're sent to the purification pool. You don't bathe in it, heavens no. You clean round it. You scrub the algae. You sweep the steps. You wipe down the statues. A priest walks past you and mutters a blessing. You say thank you, even though he didn't mean it for you. When evening comes, the temple quiets down. The offerings are cleared. The musicians leave. The priests retire to their chambers. You're told to do one final sweep. By this point, your hands are raw. Your back hurts. Your face is sunburned. You think there's a spider bite on your ankle. But you keep going. Because you lay not down until the temple floor looks exactly the same as it did that morning before the sandstorms, the bats, the cats, the pilgrims, the broken offerings, and the sacred baboon with stomach problems. And when you finally leave, you don't go home. You go to a shared dormitory near the back gate. It's crowded, loud, full of snoring, coughing, and the occasional argument. You sleep on a mat near a cracked wall. You dream about something, maybe being a priest yourself. Someday, but you know it won't happen. You're a floor sweeper, a temple servant, an invisible part of the great spiritual machine. No statue will bear your name. No hymn will mention your work. And yet, without you, the temple would stink like a compost pit, and the gods would have to walk through puddles of cad urine. So next time someone says, "Wow, Egyptian temples were so clean and majestic," remember who made them that way. A guy with a broom, no sandals, and a look of permanent exhaustion on his face. So you've escaped farming, dodged scribe school, survived the temple stench, and avoided hauling stone blocks until your spine disintegrated. But guess what? Egypt still has plans for you. Because now you've been conscripted into the army. That's right, you. The man who flinches at wasps and once sprained his ankle stepping on a pottery shard. An hour soldier of the Pharaoh, and it sounds noble, glorious, even defending the sacred land of Kemet, protecting the Nile, guarding the borders from foreign raiders, Hyksos, Libyans, Hittites, sea peoples, take your pick. There's always someone invading. But here's the truth. Being a soldier in ancient Egypt is basically agreeing to be underpaid, overworked, and severely underarmed while someone with a gold-covered helmet screams commands at you from the back of a chariot. Let's start with your training. There's not much of it. You show up at the garrison outside your village or at a desert fortress, and a man with a stick barks at you to stand in a line. You're given a spear. It looks impressive until you realize it's mostly wood with a tiny bronze or copper tip. Barely secured, you poke a training dummy and the thing bends. Your shield is made of cowhide stretched over a wooden frame, after 2 strikes from anything. Sharp, it's basically decorative, and don't even ask for a helmet. Helmets are for officers. You get a cloth wrap or, if you're lucky, a bronze skull cap that fits like a cooking pot. You wear a padded tunic. Maybe some leather if you're lucky. Most of your body is completely exposed. Meanwhile, the other guy, the one trying to stab you, He might be wearing bronze scale armor, swinging an iron sword, and riding a chariot with a driver and an archer. Guess who has the advantage? You're not just outgunned, you're outclassed. The Egyptian military is divided into elites and everyone else. The elite soldiers ride chariots, use composite bows, train all year, and get paid in land and silver. You're the grunts. You walk, you carry your gear, you get bread, beer, and maybe some dried fish if supplies are good. And you sleep on the ground, in the open, next to the guy who won't stop coughing because he got sand in his lungs last week. Your commanders don't care about you. They care about results. You march all day through blistering heat with little water, sleeping in makeshift camps, always under threat of attack. If someone falls behind, too bad. If someone dies of heat stroke, bury him quick. Keep moving. The army doesn't wait for anyone. Battle. It's not like in the movies. There's no dramatic speech. No slow-motion charge. It's a mess. You're pushed forward in a long line of men, all shouting and terrified. Your job is to stab anything that moves. But half the time, your spear glances off a shield, or your footing slips in the sand, or you trip over a dead body. You're breathing dust, screaming, ducking arrows, and hoping someone else gets hit first. The chariots. They roll in fast and terrifying. You can barely see them before they're already behind you. You're told to stand firm and brace. But when that horse-drawn death cart is bearing down on you with a screaming archer firing arrows the size of your arm, you run. Everyone runs. Discipline breaks down. Chaos erupts. And then comes the cleanup. The enemy retreats all you do. The battle's over. You lost some men. You're told it was a great victory anyway. The scribes will write about it like it was heroic. They'll paint pictures of the pharaoh smiting his enemies, even if he wasn't there, and you limp back to camp, wounded, hungry, and covered in someone else's blood. If you're lucky, the wound is shallow and you get to keep your arm. If not, well, there's no real medical tent. The healer pours honey on it, says a prayer, and tells you not to scream too loud. If it gets infected, you die, quietly, and are buried without ceremony in a pit outside the camp. And what's your reward for surviving? You go home with a few trinkets, maybe a small bag of silver if the loot was good. Or you get nothing, except scars. Maybe the pharaoh's officials give your family a jar of grain and a thank you for your loyal service. Maybe not. If you die, your name is written on a scroll if someone remembers. More likely, your family hears from a neighbor that you never came back. That's it. You're gone, erased. And if you do make it back, you're not the same. Your body aches in ways you can't explain. Your dreams are full of screaming horses and the smell of burning flesh. You return to your village and find someone else took your field while you were gone. The tax collector doesn't care that you were at war, he still wants your grain. Your wife is older. Your children are strangers. You feel disconnected from everything. Then one day, another scribe shows up. Another list, another campaign. The pharaoh needs soldiers again. Foreigners are attacking again. The gods demand vengeance again. And so it begins again. Same spear, same sandals, same nightmares. So next time someone romanticizes the Egyptian military as some noble order of divine protectors, remember, the grunts didn't live in glory. They lived in terror. They fought for a king who never touched their hand, and they died with their faces in the dust, while a royal artist back home painted victory murals on palace walls showing a smiling god-king smiting an enemy with a mace. You weren't that king. You were the nameless figure in the background, falling to your knees. Let's take a break from all the sweat, dirt, and spear stabbings of the last few parts and talk about something else, what it was like to be a woman in ancient Egypt. You've probably heard the flattering version how Egyptian women had more rights than their counterparts in Greece or Rome. And sure, on paper, that's technically true. Women could own property. They could initiate divorce. They could even run businesses or become priestesses. But the key word there is could, not did, because in practice, life as a woman in ancient Egypt was a relentless loop of childbirth, housework, religious obligation, and being blamed when things went wrong. Let's say you're born a girl in a modest peasant family. There's no party, no grand celebration. Your mother wraps you in linen scraps and gets back to work. By the time you're 5, you're already helping in the house grinding grain, fetching water, feeding chickens. There's no school for you, unless your father is wealthy or very progressive, which he's probably not. You don't learn to read or write. You learn how to make bread, carry jars on your head, and stay quiet when men are talking. By age 12 or 13, you're considered old enough to marry. You don't get to choose your husband. Your parents arrange it. Maybe he's 30, maybe 40, maybe already married. Doesn't matter. You're expected to obey. You move into his house or sometimes into his mother's house, which is worse than start your new life as a wife, and by wife, we mean full-time domestic labor. Your mornings begin before the sun. You grind grain for hours. You knead dough, fetch water from the river, tend the fire, mend clothes, care for the children his or someone else's, sweep the floor, wash linens, prepare meals, tend animals. And try not to die of heat exhaustion. Your hands are blistered, your feet are cracked, and your back constantly aches. No one thanks you. No one offers to help. Because this is your duty. This is your divine role. Even if your husband doesn't beat you, chances are he ignores you unless he needs food, sex, or another child. If he does beat you, good luck finding sympathy. The law might technically say you can file for divorce, but that requires documentation, social support, and usually a male relative on your side. You probably have none of those. And besides, if you leave him, who will feed your children? The state, the gods, how? Now, let's say you survive the early years of marriage. You give birth, and again, and again. Childbirth is dangerous. The tools are primitive. The hygiene is non-existent. And complications are common. You lay not in a hospital, you lay squatting on bricks in a dark room while other women chant, burn incense, and hope your baby doesn't come out sideways. If you survive childbirth, congratulations, now you get to breastfeed, carry a newborn on your hip while grinding grain, and immediately get pregnant again next season, rinse and repeat. And if your baby dies, and many do, you cry quietly, bury the body in the family plot, and go back to baking barley bread, emotional support. Not a thing. You're told it was the God's will. Maybe you didn't offer enough incense. Maybe the house was spiritually unclean. Maybe you were being punished. Your fault either way. What if you're wealthy? Surely it's better, right? In some ways, yes. You don't grind your own grain, you have servants. You might wear makeup, jewelry, nice linen. You might even play music or supervise the household accounts. But don't be fooled. You're still a possession. Your husband controls your money, your movements, your body. You're expected to stay indoors most of the day, out of the sun, out of sight. You're still a vessel for children, a symbol of family honor, and a target of gossip the moment you step out alone. Priestesses? Yes, they exist. But those are usually the daughters of elite families. And even then, their roles are heavily ceremonial singing, dancing, pouring libations. The high positions interpreting omens, reading sacred texts, overseeing rituals are almost always reserved for men, and the few women who rise to real political power, they're exceptions, outliers, and usually face relentless opposition. Hatshepsut had to wear a fake beard just to be taken. Seriously, is Pharaoh, Cleopatra, spent half her life fighting civil wars, and the other half being vilified by historians. Most women didn't run temples. Most women didn't rule kingdoms. Most women were nameless, voiceless, buried in shared graves without a single written word to mark their lives. You do have religion, though, and it does acknowledge you. Goddesses like Isis, Hathor, and Bastet are revered. There are festivals where women can sing, dance, and even drink freely. During certain holidays, women play a prominent public role. But those moments are rare and fleeting. For the other 360 days of the year, you're invisible. You pray for health, fertility, protection. You offer bread and incense, tie amulets to your children, and hope the gods are listening. You sleep next to a clay statue of a fertility goddess and whisper your worries to her because you can say them out loud. You might keep a small shrine in your home. You might dream of being reborn in the field of reeds, where life is finally peaceful, where no one yells, where food is abundant, and where your body doesn't hurt all the time. But right now, in this world, you're a woman. Which means you serve, you endure, you survive. If you're lucky, your husband doesn't leave you for a younger woman. If you're very lucky, one of your sons grows up to be a scribe or priest and takes care of you in your old age. If not, you work until your body gives out. And when you die, you're wrapped in linen, maybe given a small charm or two. Maybe your name is written on a piece of pottery. Maybe. And that's it. That's your legacy. Not a tomb, not a mural, not a scroll. Just a handful of memories in the minds of your family if they survive long enough to remember you. So the next time someone says women in ancient Egypt were empowered, remind them that owning property and enduring childbirth without pain relief are not the same thing. Rights on papyrus don't mean much when you're barefoot in the dust, holding a crying baby, and wondering whether the bread will rise before your husband comes home angry again. Being a woman in ancient Egypt didn't mean being weak. It meant being strong in a world that didn't notice. And that's a different kind of hardship entirely. Let us say you were one of the rare few in ancient Egypt who is considered educated. You've studied under temple priests, memorized scrolls, recited chants, learned to write. You've trained in anatomy not by dissection, which is considered taboo, but by observing wounds, birth, and death. And now, congratulations, you're a doctor. SWNW, as they call it. Sounds prestigious, doesn't it? The healer. The one who brings life back into the body. The one who stands between the living and the dead. But before you get too excited, let us clarify what being a doctor in ancient Egypt actually means. You were basically part priest, part pharmacist, part blind guesser, and part mortuary apprentice with a bag of herbs and a prayer scroll. Because here is the uncomfortable truth: most of your medical knowledge is rooted in a system that thinks people get sick because demons entered through their ears, or because their body channels were blocked by evil wind, or because they angered a god by stepping on sacred dung. Let's start with diagnostics. Your patient stumbles in, pale, sweaty, clutching his chest. Today, We'd say heart attack, but you don't know what a heart really does. You've never seen one beating. You've never cut open a chest. You don't understand blood circulation, arteries, infection, or the nervous system. What you know is that the body is made up of channels that run from head to toe. When one is blocked, pain happens. And if the pain is in the chest, the wind in that region must be trapped. So, you consult your medical papyrus, the Ebers papyrus, or the Edwin Smith papyrus. It tells you to crush garlic, mix it with beer, recite a protective charm, and smear the mixture across the chest while invoking Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of plague and healing. If the pain continues, well, maybe the wind was particularly strong. Try a different recipe. Add crushed lizard tail. Maybe toss in some honey. Pray harder. But that's not even the strangest part. You also treat things like wandering womb in women, which, yes, is exactly what it sounds like. You believe that a woman's uterus can wander around her body like a lost goat, pressing on organs, causing madness, seizures, and sudden fainting. The cure: fumigate the woman's lower body with incense to lure the womb back into place. Yes, that is a real treatment. And don't even ask what happens if she starts screaming mid-treatment. You'll just be told to hold her down and chant louder. Surgery. Oh, sure. You do minor operations. If someone gets a cut, you clean it with honey, thankfully. One of the few things that actually works, and bandage it. You stitch wounds with linen thread. If a bone is broken, you try to set it. Sometimes you even succeed. But anything deep, anything involving the chest, brain, or internal organs, forget it. You're not touching that. If the patient lives, it's the God's will. If he dies, same thing. Either way, your conscience is clean. Dentistry, that's a nightmare. Ancient Egyptians had terrible teeth. The bread was full of sand from the grinding stones. Every bite scraped enamel like chewing gravel. Cavities were common. Infections were deadly. And your tools: bronze hooks, stone scrapers, no anesthesia. If someone screams, you give them more beer. If they pass out, you keep working. If their jaw swells and they can't breathe, you pray for them and write a scroll for their family. You also serve as a coroner of sorts. You examine the dead. You don't dissect them again. Taboo, but you observe. You note swellings, discoloration, wounds. You try to learn. But your conclusions are often spiritual. The god of the West claimed him. He ate unclean food. A demon spirit sat on his chest during sleep. These aren't metaphors. They're official medical opinions. And yet, despite all this, you're respected. People come to you from across the village, bringing chickens or jars of oil as payment. They trust you because you wear the linen of the learned, because you carry scrolls, because your hut smells like incense and bitter herbs. You might even be summoned to the home of a noble. He's having headaches. You examine him. You press on his temples. You recite the spell to drive away the evil of the eye. You offer a salve made of crushed lotus and goosefat. He thanks you. You bow and leave. Later, he dies in his sleep. His family blames a rival's curse. No one questions your treatment. Of course, you're not the only healer. There are also midwives, exorcists, charm readers, and temple physicians. Each has their own specialty. Midwives are some of the most important. They handle childbirth, which is among the most dangerous events in a woman's life. They use birthing stools, amulets, oils, and songs. And when things go wrong, when the baby is breech, or the mother starts hemorrhaging, there's not much anyone can do. The midwife just holds her hand and whispers, hoping the gods intervene. Temple physicians are even more elite. They study sacred anatomy based on mummification, not living bodies. They know how to remove organs, dry them with natron, wrap them, store them in jars. Their knowledge is precise, but it doesn't help the living much. Still, their words carry authority. If a temple doctor says a man is cursed, everyone believes it. The solution: offerings, maybe a statue, maybe a sacrificial goose. Medicine and religion are inseparable. Healing is not just science, it's sacred ritual. You heal the body by healing the soul. You chant. You burn incense. You draw protective symbols on the skin. And you never question whether it works. Questioning is heresy. Doubt is dangerous. Doubt is what gets people buried in unmarked graves. You do have some remedies that actually work. Honey, for instance, is antibacterial. Willow bark helps with pain. Pomegranate rinds treat parasites. But you don't know why they work. You just know they were written in the old scrolls. And the old scrolls are lore. Sometimes you wonder what it would be like to truly understand the body. To open a chest and see the heart. To study blood, nerves, bones, disease. But you never will. The gods forbade it. The dead are sacred. Knowledge must come from the stars, not from flesh. So you recite your spells, mash your herbs, smear your ointments, and hope. Hope the patient walks out. Hope the gods approve. Hope no one sees through the cracks in your confidence. And when you die, if you are lucky, someone calls you wise. Maybe they even carve your name into a small stele. Maybe a future doctor copies your treatment for evil wind of the liver and mutters your name with respect. But deep down, you know the truth. You were doing your best with scrolls full of guesswork, treating symptoms you couldn't see, caused by things you didn't understand. Being a doctor in ancient Egypt wasn't about curing people. It was about surviving long enough to convince others that you could. Let's say you didn't end up as a farmer, soldier, pyramid holder, or priest's apprentice. Let us say you were born into just enough misfortune that you found yourself in the service of a noble family, maybe a high-ranking priest, a government official, or a local governor. On the surface, that might sound like a lucky break. After all, you're indoors. You're around people with power. You might even get to wear clean linen and eat leftover scraps from the family's table. But make no mistake, you're still a servant. And being a servant in ancient Egypt means you're treated with the same care and attention as the pot that holds the beer or the mat that soaks up the sweat. Useful, but silent, invisible, and replaceable. Your day starts long before the nobles wake. The sun hasn't even cleared the horizon when you're already on your feet, cleaning the courtyard with a straw broom, fetching water from the nearest well, and preparing the bread ovens. The house itself is large by Egyptian standards, made of sun-baked mud bricks, with painted walls and a central garden. But don't get any ideas. You don't live here. You sleep in a storage room, maybe on a reed mat, maybe just on the hard-packed dirt. You rise with the sun, and if you're still breathing when it sets, that's considered a good day. Your main job, everything. You grind grain. You bake bread. You scrub floors. You carry messages. You serve meals. You chase off stray cats. You entertain spoiled children. You fill jars with water and keep them cool. You wipe sweat from your master's brow while he lounges in the shade, complaining about the taxes he himself helped design. You never speak unless spoken to. You never sit in the presence of your master. You never meet his eyes unless he orders it. The lady of the house is worse. She controls the servants like she's commanding troops in battle. She notices dust on the window ledge that hasn't been opened in a month. She scolds you if a lotus flower in the pond begins to wilt like it is your fault the sun exists. If the food is too salty, she blames you. If it's not salty enough, she still blames you. If her favorite necklace isn't in the exact spot on her dresser that it was yesterday, she assumes you've touched it and may have you whipped for disrespect. Yes, whipping is on the table, so is shaving your head in shame, cutting your rations, or assigning you to latrine duty for a month. Servants are expected to be grateful for their beatings. After all, the nobles could have chosen slaves instead. At least you're technically free, they say. You can leave, in theory. But if you do, where will you go? Who will take you in? You have no land, no family nearby, no name worth remembering. Better to keep your head down and keep sweeping. The nobles' children treat you like a toy. If they're young, they'll demand stories and songs. If they're older, they'll treat you like a living punching bag. One day, they may decide you looked at them funny and tell their father. And then you're back on your knees, begging not to be beaten for something you didn't do. And if one of the sons gets drunk and decides you're funny looking, he might throw wine at you. If he's angry, he might hit you. You can't hit back. You can't yell. You smile, you bow. You clean the stain from your linen. Sometimes guests rive other nobles, soldiers, officials. When they do, the household goes into full panic mode. You're expected to sweep every inch of the floor, perfume the hallways with burning myrrh, chase the flies out of the courtyard, and prepare trays of food and drink. You walk silently with the tray balanced on your hands, praying not to drop anything. Because if you do, it's not just your clumsiness, it's a scandal. You've embarrassed the family. You will be punished, loudly, to show everyone that the household maintains order. The irony. The food you carry is better than anything you'll ever taste. Roast goose, honey cakes, pomegranates, dates, garlic marinated fish, cool jars of wine. You smell it. You touch it. You serve it. But you never eat it. Your meal is flatbread, onions, and maybe some dried beans served in a clay bowl chipped in 3 places. You eat it squatting in the servants' corner, surrounded by silence, while the nobles laugh and belch in the next room. Bathing, you wash in a bucket. The nobles bathe in shallow pools with perfumed oils. You empty their dirty water when they're done. Sometimes they let you clean their sandals if you're well behaved. If you get sick, you're expected to keep working. If your leg is injured, they just assign you to a less visible corner of the house. If you collapse, they'll pour water on your face, then yell at you for wasting the day. Now let's talk status. You have none. People will walk past you in the street like you're air. The local market vendors will barely look at you when you hackle. Other servants from other households may look down on you because their master owns more land, or their mistress gives them better sandals. Your entire social life is confined to whispers in the kitchen and eye rolls exchanged in hallways. You know who's sleeping with whom. You know who's stealing leftover wine. You know everything about the house, but none of it helps you. You dream of leaving, of course. Maybe running away to become a trader, a brewer, a boatman. But you have no money, no contacts, no protection. The roads are dangerous. The cities are worse. You're stuck. The household gives you just enough food to survive, just enough shelter to avoid death, and just enough fear to keep you obedient. One day, the master dies. Maybe from a snakebite. Maybe a chariot accident. Maybe a slow disease no one can name. There's mourning in the house wailing, ritual fasting, priests performing sacred rites, and you're scrubbing the floor in the courtyard while the embalmer prepares his body. You don't get to mourn. You didn't lose a man. You lost a job, a purpose, a routine. If the son inherits, he might keep you. Or he might sell the estate, marry into another house, or dismiss the entire staff. You hear the news last. Always last. You leave the house one final time, carrying the same bowl you used for years. You walk into the street, an aimless servant among hundreds. No one thanks you for your loyalty. No one carves your name on a wall. No one remembers that you once saved the noble child from choking, or that you worked through a fever so bad you hallucinated gods in the doorway. You were a shadow in a wealthy man's house, a silent presence, a breathing piece of furniture. So the next time someone says the Egyptians were great patrons of art, poetry, and divine order, remember, behind every polished courtyard, every colorful mural, every banquet and perfume-slicked feast, there were dozens of barefoot, overworked, faceless people scrubbing the floor while pretending they didn't exist. You were one of them. And no one ever asked your name. Imagine waking up to the sound of shouting. Not roosters, not the Nile birds. No, it's the overseer barking orders before the sun has even cracked over the horizon. You don't need to ask what day it is, because it's the same as every day. You're a builder, or at least, that's what they call you. In reality, you're just one more cog in the vast, grinding, sun-scorched, back-breaking machine that is the pharaoh's latest glory project. You might be helping raise a temple. Or maybe it's a tomb, a monument, a ceremonial obelisk. Doesn't matter, all of them are massive. All of them are designed to glorify someone whose sandals cost more than your entire existence. And all of them require you to carry, lift, drag, shape, or stack stone so enormous they make your spine ache just thinking about them. Now, let's get one thing straight, this isn't slavery. That's a misconception. You're technically a free man. You might even get paid in food and all. Maybe a little beer. But it's not like you signed up for this. Most likely, your village was selected by royal decree. You were rounded up, placed on a work detail, and shipped off to a desert work camp that smells like dust, sweat, and crushed dreams. You won't be home for months, maybe years. Your day begins before sunrise. You're marched out to the site, which looks like a giant sandbox full of angry ants carrying rocks. Your job today: whole limestone blocks from the quarry to the building platform. Each one weighs more than your entire family. You work in a crew. There's a foreman who screams a lot and it's harder. He has a stick with a crook carved into the handle to remind you who he works for. You pull the sleds using thick ropes that rip your hands raw. The ground is hot, uneven, and covered in sand that gets into your eyes, nose, and mouth, and if you're lucky, it's just limestone. Sometimes it's granite that has to come from quarries in Aswan. Do you know how far Aswan is from Giza? Very. And guess how they move it? Boats. If the Nile cooperates. Otherwise, hundreds of men hauling one block on rollers while chanting the same phrase over and over to distract themselves from the pain. It's not poetry, it's survival. Once the stone is in place, another team, maybe even you, has to shape it. You do this with copper chisels, wooden mallets, and a lot of sweat. The copper dulls fast. The tools break. The dust gets in your lungs. You cough. You keep going. There are no breaks unless the overseer feels generous or someone faints from heat stroke, and even then it's only until they drag the body off the path. Meals, slop in a clay bowl. Flat bread and lentils if you're lucky. Maybe dried fish that smells like it died twice. You eat squatting in the shade of a half-finished wall while trying to keep the flies off your face. And don't even think about skipping a shift. If you don't show up, someone goes to your village and drags your cousin into your place. Loyalty is enforced by collective punishment, injury. You wrap it and keep moving. A twisted ankle just means you carry smaller stones. A broken finger earns you an afternoon sweeping debris instead of hauling bricks until the swelling moves down. If you really can't work, they don't send you home. They just replace you and leave you to recover or not in the shade, where you can be an example of what happens when you lose your purpose. But let us say you survive long enough to get promoted to one of the more skilled jobs like carving hieroglyphs or polishing pillars. Now you're part of the decoration crew. You spend your days bent over a wall, chipping tiny symbols into stone, while some priest or official hovers over you, criticizing your technique. Never mind that he's never held a chisel in his life. You're expected to carve the pharaohs. Victories, his divine heritage, and a bunch of things you know for a fact didn't happen. Like the time he defeated 1,000 enemies single-handedly. Sure he did. While you were dragging his statue up a ramp. Do it wrong, and the stone has to be redone. That means ray carving, ray smoothing, and ray chiseling. All under the threat of being removed from the skilled crew and sent back to hauling stone with the newer, angrier guys. You don't want that. The skilled team gets slightly better food. Sometimes even beer. And if you're lucky, a scrap of shade for lunch. Even your downtime isn't restful. After a full day of grinding labor under the sun, you get to sleep in a cramped mud-brick dormitory packed with sweaty bodies and snoring mouths. No pillows, no peace. Just the occasional rat skittering across your blanket and the ever-present stink of feet. You whisper curses in the dark and hope tomorrow someone else gets reassigned to clean the latrine. Yet, you dream about going home, about seeing your family again, about not waking up to the sound of a taskmaster yelling, but those are just dreams. You're not here because you chose this. You're here because someone at the top decided they wanted a giant stone thing built with their name on it. You'll never meet them. They'll never know your name, but you'll spend years shaping their immortality. Sometimes a man dies on sight, maybe a heat stroke, maybe crushed under a load, maybe he just gives up. The other workers stop for a moment, say a prayer to Anubis, and then keep working. The body is taken away. Someone new shows up the next day. Nothing changes. The stone doesn't care who places it. The monument doesn't remember your face. The irony. Thousands of years from now, people will admire the building you helped raise. Tourists will take photos. Historians will write books. Documentaries will marvel at the engineering, and they'll say, "Look what the Egyptians built," as if it were done by magic or divine favor. They won't mention you. They won't mention the cough you got from stone dust, or the nail you lost dragging rope, or the friend you saw fall from scaffolding. So yes, you were technically a builder, but more accurately, you were the living, breathing machinery of the state. You were muscle with no voice, hands with no name. You built temples, tombs, and towers, but the only thing that might ever remember you is the ghost of your sweat soaked into the stone, and even that fades with time. Death is everywhere in ancient Egypt. It's not hidden behind hospital curtains or whispered about in vague terms. It's in the air, in the rituals, in the art, in the endless statues of Anubis and Osiris. It's a part of life. But that doesn't make it any easier. In fact, being the one left behind being the mourner is its own form of exhausting, terrifying, and painfully public suffering. Because mourning isn't just about grief in Egypt. It's about performance. It's about ritual. It's about doing everything exactly right, or else your loved one might not reach the afterlife. And worse, people might talk. Let's say your father dies. He wasn't wealthy, but he had a little land, a few goats, a good name. When he passes, you don't just bury him quietly and move on. You begin a complex, multi-step journey that's equal parts religion, logistics, public relations, and economic hardship. First, the body has to be taken to an embalmer. But not just any embalmer, the right one. The one who knows the proper rites. The one who won't cut corners and risk the wrath of the gods. If your family has money, he'll be mummified with oils, natron, linen, and ceremony. If not, well, the process is still the same in name, but with cheaper materials and less attention. Either way, the body is drained, dried, wrapped, and stored in a coffin, sometimes several. This takes days, sometimes weeks, and during this time, you, the family, and especially the women, must begin mourning loudly. Visibly, you wail. You scream. You throw dust on your head. You tear your clothes. You cry in public so that the entire village knows how deep your grief is. This isn't optional. If you grieve too little, you're cold and disrespectful. If you grieve too much, you're accused of theatrics. It's a tightrope act where your own heartbreak is just one of many things to manage. And there are professional mourners, usually women hired to perform the sorrow, weep loudly, beat their chests, and call out the name of the deceased as part of the funeral procession. They know the correct phrases. They know when to sob and when to collapse dramatically. If you don't hire enough of them, people assume your family didn't care enough. Or worse, that you couldn't afford them. Image matters even in death. Then comes the burial. You walk in procession to the tomb or grave site, following the coffin. If your family is well off, it's a tomb with painted walls and a stela carved with prayers. If you're poor, it's a shallow pit in the desert, lined with stones and offerings. Either way, you're expected to provide grave goods, food, drink, amulets, clothing, shabtus to serve your loved one in the afterlife. Every item is symbolic. Every item must be correct. You place onions near the body to ward off evil spirits. You say the opening of the mouth ritual so the dead can speak and eat in the next world. You burn incense, pour beer, chant spells. And all of it costs money. The priests want payment. The embalmers want payment. The builders of the tomb, the makers of the coffin, the mourners, the suppliers of offerings, they all expect compensation. And if you skimp, it's not just social embarrassment. It's spiritual risk. Because if the dead are not properly honored, they might become restless. They might wander. They might haunt. You don't want that. No one wants that. So you pay what you can. You borrow. You sell livestock. You go into debt. All to make sure the gods receive your father. With open arms. After the burial, your work isn't done. You're expected to maintain the tomb. Bring food offerings. Speak his name. Keep his memory alive. Forgetting is a second death, and no one wants to be forgotten. But let's say you don't have the money, or the time, or the strength. Then the tomb decays. The offering table is bare, and you start having dreams, visions of your father, angry, alone, thirsty in the afterlife. The guilt eats you. People begin to whisper, maybe your family is cursed. Maybe the dead are displeased. Maybe it's your fault. And that's just for an ordinary death, if the deceased was a child. The grief is doubled, but the rituals are harder. Children aren't always given full rights unless the family insists. If it was a woman, the mourning is segregated. Women cry inside the house. Men organize outside. If the death was violent, an accident, a murder, a death that see their additional rites to cleanse the soul, sometimes even exorcisms. Death is bureaucratic. It's spiritual paperwork wrapped in linen. You miss your loved one. But you're not allowed to just feel that. You have to act it, fund it, prove it. Grieve the right way or risk losing them forever. Even your personal grief is judged. If you stay too sad for too long, people talk. If you recover too fast, people talk. And you don't get time off. You still have to farm. Still have to pay taxes. Still have to fetch water. No one pauses the world because your brother drowned in the Nile. And when you finally have a moment to breathe, to sit in silence, and remember their voice, you ray interrupted by a priest reminding you it is time to renew the offerings, or by a debt collector who wants payment for the wooden coffin you haven't finished paying off. In the end, your mourning isn't just about the dead. It's about you, and the living, and what kind of person you're seen as. Are you pious, dutiful, generous, or are you selfish, negligent, impious? Your grief becomes a test, not of love, but of reputation, and when you die, the cycle continues. Your children will mourn you, or they won't. Maybe they can't afford to. Maybe they forget the spells. Maybe they mispronounce your name in the afterlife and you wander forever, mouth closed, stomach empty, unseen. That's the real fear in ancient Egypt, not death, but neglect. Being erased. Being alone. Not in the world of the living, but in the field of reeds, where everyone else is feasting with the gods and you're just a shadow beneath the palms. So you do everything right now. You mourn by the book. You cry in the right places. You remember the names of your dead so someone might one day remember yours. You weep not just out of sadness, but out of duty, because in ancient Egypt, mourning is not for the weak. It's a full-time job with eternal consequences. You finally did it. You escaped the fields, the quarry, the spear, and the kitchen. You became a scribe, one of the few in ancient Egypt who can read and write. That should mean you've made it. Right. You're educated, respected, and wear clean linen while everyone else sweats in the sun. But once you sit down behind your low wooden desk, sharpen your reed brush, and dip it into ink made of soot and crushed berries, the dream dies quickly. Because the truth is, you're not writing poetry or history or some grand philosophical treatise. You're copying tax records, grain counts, bird manifests, temple inventories, legal disputes about donkeys, and you're copying them over and over and over again. You are for all practical purposes a glorified human photocopier who has to sit cross-legged on a hard floor for 16 hours a day hunched over a scroll with sand in your hair, ink on your fingers, and the constant threat of making a mistake hanging over your head. Let's start with your training. Becoming a scribe meant attending the House of Life, a temple school where you spent years memorizing hundreds of hieroglyphs and practicing them endlessly on broken pottery shards and scraps of papyrus. If you were lucky, your teacher only hit you with a stick a few times a week. The others weren't so fortunate. Mistakes meant ridicule. Sloppy handwriting meant punishment. Not knowing the right way to write grain silo in 6 different contexts, You got to spend the afternoon scrubbing the floor of the scriptorium instead of eating lunch. But you survived. You made it, and now you work for a temple, or the palace. Or maybe the vizier's office if your handwriting is particularly crisp. Your job is not glamorous. It's endless transcription. You copy out legal contracts, death records, spells, letters, tax complaints, shipping logs, letters to foreign dignitaries, and reports about how many oxen went missing last month from the royal granaries. Gods forbid. You make an error. Papyrus is expensive. Ink is valuable. Every time you mess up, someone has to scrape the surface, rake-out it, and hope it doesn't look suspicious. Some bosses make you redo the entire sheet from scratch. One mistake in a land grant contract and a noble family might lose their farm. One mistake in a death certificate and someone's spirit might wander for eternity. That's on you. Your back constantly aches. Your knees go numb. Your eyes burn from squinting at tiny symbols by flickering oil light. Your fingers are stained black, and every time you cough or sneeze. The dust from dried ink and shredded papyrus makes it worse, but don't think anyone cares. The overseer doesn't thank you. The noble who reads your report thinks it wrote itself. The priest assumes Thoth blessed your hands, when really it was just years of painful repetition and calloused fingers. Don't get too ambitious. You might have fantasies about writing something important to him, a myth, maybe even a story. But unless you're working under a generous patron or sneak a scroll into your settle at night, you'll spend your whole life copying things that are more tedious than they're meaningful. And even if you do get a chance to compose something, it has to follow strict format, correct form, approved language, sanctioned praise of gods or pharaohs. No creativity, no flair. Just formula. Even your poetry has to rhyme in the way the temple likes or be burned. And yet, you're one of the lucky ones. Because being a scribe is considered elite work. You don't farm. You don't bleed. You don't dig canals with a shovel that gives you blisters in the first hour. People bow slightly when you pass. You might get a decent house. You might even eat meat sometimes. And if you manage to rise through the ranks, maybe you become a bureaucrat. You'll get to dictate the letters instead of writing them. But don't assume that means freedom. That just means you're now responsible for 3 times the paperwork, because ancient Egypt runs on documentation, every offering, every temple rite, every grain shipment, every border patrol, every marriage contract documented, signed, sealed. That means more work for you. And if you fall behind, the punishment is swift. Not death, no. Just public humiliation. Docked rations. A letter to your superior complaining about your lazy pen. Worse than pain is the loss of status. Because status is everything for a scribe. You spend your life upholding the system, recording the lives of others while your own slowly disappears into the margins. If you're lucky, maybe someone copies your name onto a list of faithful servants of the palace. Maybe it survives in a dusty storeroom, unread for 3,000 years, but probably not. Probably your work will be stored, referenced once or twice, then thrown away, burned, or recycled into mummy wrappings. That's the great irony. You preserve other people's stories, pharaohs, generals, priests, merchants. You copy their deeds with perfect care. But your own story, no one writes that down. No one copies it. No one remembers the time you worked through fever to finish a report on Nile flooding. No one remembers the extra column you added because the priest forgot to include one of the gods. No one cares that your ink ran out mid-copy and you ran barefoot to the market before sundown to make the delivery on time. And still, you keep writing, Because that's the job. That's your identity. That's your place. You don't fight. You don't build. You don't rule. You copy, and copy, and copy, and one day your hands will shake too much. Your eyes will blur. Your brush will fall from your fingers, and someone younger, with straighter posture and fewer blisters, will take your seat. You will be sent home with a pat on the back and a loaf of bread. Maybe a small jar of oil. And then what? You will fade into obscurity, unless your son becomes a scribe too, in which case the cycle starts again. So yes, being a scribe is better than hulling bricks or dying in battle. But don't be fooled. You're still a tool. A human machine. A servant of paper and ink. And in ancient Egypt, that's about as close to immortality as most people ever get. Not because you're remembered, but because your handwriting survives longer than your name. Congratulations, you've made it to one of the most prestigious roles in ancient Egypt, a priest. People bow to you. Farmers give you offerings. You walk in and out of temples draped in clean linen, with your head shaved smooth and your scent of incense always lingering in the air. You don't dig ditches, haul stones, or carry trays of fish. You speak for the gods. You maintain divine order met itself. But here is what nobody tells you. Being a priest isn't about divine wisdom or transcendental enlightenment. It's about routine. Exhausting, repetitive, bureaucratic routine. You're essentially a middle manager in an invisible company whose CEO hasn't spoken in person for thousands of years, and who still demands that the hallway be swept 12 times a day. And the same hymns sung at precisely the same pitch, or the world might fall apart. You wake up before sunrise. You bathe not once, not twice, but 3 times. Purity rituals. Always purity rituals. Your body must be cleansed constantly. You wear fresh linen, no jewelry, no sandals. If a single speck of dirt clings to your ankle, you're impure. If you touch the wrong object with the wrong hand, impure. If you sneeze during the temple rites, may the gods have mercy. Your job. Make sure the goddess statue in the sanctuary is cared for as if it were a living, breathing, temperamental royal toddler with the power to smite crops and bring plagues. Every morning, you enter the Holy of Holies, a space so sacred no one else is allowed near it, and begin the daily divine maintenance. You remove yesterday's offering table. You bathe the statue. You anoint it with oils. You dress it in tiny fresh linen garments. Yes, you literally clothe the statue. You place food and drink before it. Bread, beer, meat, fruit. You recite the same prayers, in the same order, with the same cadence. You light incense. You ring a sistrum. You sing hymns. You close the shrine's doors, and when it's all done, the food is removed and eaten by the priests, because the gods consume the essence, not the physical form, which is convenient, because otherwise that food would go to waste. The problem is, you do this every single day, forever, with no deviation. And if you mess up, you don't just get scolded, you risk divine chaos. At least, that's what you've been told. And don't assume all priests are equal. There's a hierarchy. At the top, the high priest gets the real power. He oversees festivals, manages temple wealth, speaks directly with the pharaoh, and probably doesn't do much daily cleaning. Then there's the lector priest, who reads sacred texts and performs rituals. The wab priest handles purification and basic duties. The hemkar priests manage funerary rites. And you're somewhere in the middle. Probably a glorified custodian with holy responsibilities, and very human supervisors in temples are not just spiritual centers, they're economic engines. They own land, herds, workshops, slaves. They're state-run mega-churches with bureaucracies so vast they need their own scribes, guards, and storehouses. Which means that half your job is checking inventories, managing the rotation of offerings, and making sure some guy in the back room isn't stealing goat meat from the god's portion. When you're not performing rituals, you're mediating petty disputes about temple land, or listening to farmers complain that the temple cows are eating their barley, or overseeing scribes copying tax exemptions for temple properties, because yes, the temple doesn't pay taxes. You're part of a tax-exempt divine loophole, which sounds great until you read the one explaining to the local governor why the granary is mysteriously light this season. You also deal with festival days, huge public spectacles with parades, processions, both ceremonies and ritual feasts. Sounds fun. It's not. It's exhausting. You have to organize the dancers, the musicians, the purification rites, the offerings, and make sure no one gets drunk and topples a sacred bark onto a priestess. And when the goddess statue is taken out for a public display carefully hidden inside a gilded shrine, you walk barefoot through the street, smiling, chanting, sweating in the heat while pretending your bladder doesn't exist. And heaven help you if it rains, or if the wind knocks over a canopy, or if someone in the crowd faints and ruins the sacred choreography. But at least you're respected, right? Technically, yes. People fear you. People bring you gifts. They believe you can intercede with the gods. But that also means they blame you when things go wrong. Crops fail. The gods are angry. Why? Maybe the priest didn't sing the hymn correctly. Maybe the statue wasn't bathed enough. Maybe someone used the wrong kind of incense, and guess who's under review? You. And if there's a scandal, say, a priest caught stealing offerings, or consorting with someone impure, it doesn't just shame the temple. It endangers the entire cosmic balance. So yes, your every move is scrutinized. No pressure. Let's not forget funerals. You get to recite the spells, chant the prayers, burn the incense, open the mouth of the deceased so their car can breathe in the afterlife. All very spiritual, but you also get to deal with grieving families, badly wrapped corpses, and arguments about how many jars of beer are enough to satisfy the soul. Sometimes you're just a glorified event planner for the dead, and when you're off duty, you're still not really off. You can't drink too much. You can't be seen eating unclean food. You can't gamble. You can't get into fights. You are expected to be the walking embodiment of Matt, order, balance, harmony, which mostly means everyone watches and judges you constantly. You start to forget what normal conversation sounds like. You dream in hymns. You wake up reciting spells. You go weeks without touching anything made of pork or metal or non-sacred cloth. And for what? So the pharaoh can say the gods are pleased and the sun still rises. So the temple treasury stays full. So the people don't panic. Being a priest in ancient Egypt isn't about spiritual awakening. It's about controlled order routine. You don't question. You don't innovate. You perform. Every day, for years, until your joints ache and your mind dulls and someone younger shaves his head and takes your place. And then, maybe, you get a small stela in the temple courtyard, thanking you for your decades of service to the gods. Maybe a line that says you were faithful, diligent, pure. But nothing about the blisters, the boredom, the constant fear of doing it wrong. Just a name. Carved in stone, as forgettable as the hundreds you helped bury before. Let's say you're a woman in ancient Egypt, and let us start with what everyone loves to repeat. Women in ancient Egypt had rights, and yes, technically, you can own property. You can divorce your husband. You can inherit land. You can even take someone to court, compared to women in other ancient civilizations. You're practically living in a feminist utopia. But the key word here is technically. Because in practice, being a woman in ancient Egypt means navigating a maze of expectations, restrictions, social traps, and constant performance where everything you do is judged by men, your family, your neighbors, the gods, and probably your own reflection. You are born into a world that already has a plan for you. Daughter, wife, mother, then hopefully widow if you live that long. If your family is poor, you're working by the time you can walk, grinding grain, fetching water, helping your mother spin thread. There's no such thing as childhood. There's survival. If your family is rich, congratulations, you don't have to work in the fields. Instead, you get locked inside the home, hidden behind curtains, trained to be polite, fertile, quiet, and decorative. Either way, your life isn't your own. Marriage isn't about love. It's about alliances, dowries, and wands. Your father chooses your husband. You were likely married off by your early teens to a man twice your age who sees you more as a future baby factory than a person. If he's kind, your life might be manageable. If he's cruel, no one will help you. Yes, the law says you can divorce him. But how? With what money? Where would you go? Your reputation would be shredded the moment you tried. And reputation, for a woman, is everything. If you step outside too often, people talk. If you laugh too loudly, people whisper. If your hem is too short, if your eyes linger too long, if you speak with a man who isn't your husband, the rumors start. One rumor, and suddenly you're not a respectable wife, you're a disgrace, a burden, a failed woman. Even childbirth, your supposed sacred duty, is a battlefield. There's no medicine, no trained doctors. You give birth crouched on bricks, praying the gods are in a good mood. Infection, hemorrhage, or stillbirth are always one breath away. If you survive, great, you're expected to go right back to work, raise the child, and prepare for the next one. If your child dies, you're told the gods had a reason. If you die, the midwife tells your husband she did her best, and that's it. You're gone. But maybe you're lucky. Maybe you're educated. Maybe your family lets you learn to read and write. Now you have options, sort of. You could work as a priestess. That is, if you ray from the right class and the right temple and you swear to follow hundreds of purity laws, you could be a midwife or a perfume maker. You could become a professional mourner, crying on cue at funerals. You could sing at banquets or play the harp, assuming no one decides that makes you indecent. You could own a shop or a tavern, but you'd better be widowed or childless, or else people think you're neglecting your real duties. You can go to court, yes. You can sue someone. You can even win. But good luck being taken seriously. The scribe writes down what you say, but he rolls his eyes. The judge listens, but not with both ears. If the man you're accusing has friends in the right places, your case disappears into the sand. You'll hear, "You're brave for speaking up." Right before someone warns you to stay quiet for your own good, the temple statues show goddesses with power, Isis, Hathor, Sekhmet. But you are not a goddess. You're flesh and blood, and judged by how well you mirror the silent, obedient versions of them. If you speak like Isis, they say you're wise. If you act like her, they say you're dangerous. And let's not forget what happens when you're old. If you have sons who love you, you might be cared for. If not, you're a burden. If your husband dies and leaves you land, the neighbors whisper that you must have seduced him for it. If you stay unmarried, people assume you're cursed. Alone, In a world ruled by men, you must be clever just to survive. You learn to navigate with a smile. You compliment the overseer even when he insults you. You thank the priest for his blessings even when they cost more than you can afford. You raise your daughters to be strong but silent, and your sons to protect you because no one else will. Sometimes you rebel quietly. You burn a letter instead of delivering it. You pretend you didn't hear the neighbor insult you. You add a little more beer to the offering jar than required, just in case the gods are watching. You learn to carry your grief in a clay pot shaped like joy. And still, you're told how free you are. How lucky you are to live in a society where women have rights. And you nod, knowing that those rights have strings thicker than papyrus scrolls and knots tighter than a linen headdress. You tell yourself the stories of women who made it queens like Kate Shepsett or Nefertiti, but you also know those are exceptions, not rules. You are not a queen. You are not immortal. You are a woman with a back sore from kneading dough, eyes dry from crying at night, and hands blistered from carrying water your whole life. And when you die, someone will chant a prayer about the lady of the house while placing your body in a tomb you probably didn't choose. They'll say you were a good wife, a good mother, a good daughter. They won't mention the things you wanted but never asked for. They won't carve the moments of silence you endured into stone. They'll remember your name if you're lucky, but not your voice. Not the real one. The truth is, being a woman in ancient Egypt was a balancing act on a tightrope of expectations. One wrong step, and the whole temple of your life could crumble. You could own land and still be powerless. You could bear children and still be unloved. You could follow every rule and still be blamed. So yes, you had rights. But you also had shackles made not of metal, but of tradition, duty, and silence, and they were just as heavy. So after this long, dusty, painfully honest journey through ancient Egypt, ask yourself again, would you really last a single day there? Sure, the architecture was grand, the gods were majestic, and the art was beautiful enough to survive for millennia. But behind every golden mask and temple, was a human being who was hot, tired, sore, hungry, and probably a little confused about why their entire life revolved round pleasing gods they never saw and rulers they never met. Being a farmer meant surviving on bread that broke your teeth while your back broke under the sun. Being a soldier meant either dying young in some desert skirmish or limping home with half your body intact. Builders moved mountains literally and never saw their names on any of the monuments they built. Scribes were praised as scholars, but spent most of their lives copying the ancient equivalent of grocery lists and court complaints. Women had rights on paper but lived inside invisible cages built from expectations and quiet sacrifices. Even priests, with all their supposed divine connection, lived like glorified janitors cleaning up after a statue that never said thank you, and don't even start with what mourning felt like, or what it meant to perform grief like you were being watched by gods, ghosts, and gossiping neighbors all at once. Every rule, every class, every gender had its own set of chains. Some were visible, some were sacred, some were praised as duty or destiny, but they were chains nonetheless, and yes, the Nile flooded, the stars aligned, the gods received their offerings, and the pharaohs got their pyramids, but it all came at a cost paid by millions of forgotten people whose daily lives were anything but glorious. They lived in mud-brick homes, prayed for enough barley to make beer, worried about crocodiles and curses, and died with their names etched into nothing but temporary silence. So the next time someone tells you how advanced, how enlightened, or how mystical ancient Egypt was, remember this: for every gleaming artifact in a museum, there were thousands of blisters, bruises, fevers, and tears that didn't survive, History remembers the kings, the gods. And the temples, it forgets the people who actually built, bled, and served them. And now you know the truth, because you've just walked a mile in sandals filled with sand and regret. You felt the sweat, the fear, the absurdity, and the grind. So be thankful for your clean water, your soft bed, and your lack of daily crocodile-related anxiety. Because if you ever did time travel back to ancient Egypt, one thing's for sure, you absolutely, definitely wouldn't last a day. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoy being historically humbled, don't forget to like, subscribe, and come back next time for more reminders that the good old days were usually only good if you were born with a crown and sword, or absolutely no desire to question anything ever. See you next time, and try not to get reincarnated into a Bali tax dispute.